coloniality or apartheid. Let's say that we have that context, right? Let's say that we have a reality shaped by that. What does it mean to oppose that reality with liberalism? And thus my thesis is that liberalism in a way allows for a continuation of the fundamental structures of power that operate in that. And what it does, it does two things at the same time. Liberalism sort of targets and disables the most vulgar, V-U-L-G-A-R, vulgar forms, I know my accent, something similar. It disables the most vulgar forms of segregation, the very patently racist forms of white supremacy and superiority, black inferiority, all this, right, very crude racism. It disables that, it goes against that, but also it disables the conceptual tools needed to dismantle segregation and dehumanization effectively. So it gives you the illusion, so it does both things at the same time, so it gives you the illusion that because it's disabling vulgar forms of racism, it gives you the illusion that that's an advancement. But simultaneously, it is disabling the tools that are needed to actually challenge that very order. So then, what happens is that a reality very close to the fascism continues, structurally speaking, but ideologically speaking, is in good conscience. Right? Because you are disabling vulgar racism. And so, to the extent that anyone who challenges that order or liberalism, you try to put them as the vulgar ones that are bringing racism back and divisions and so on. So you do that continuously. And the university, I think, plays a major role in that process. So, and I think that South Africa plausibly explains a major case study about this combination. And so that on the basis of my fieldwork. So that's the gist of it, right? So I don't know, I will have probably to cut short and so on, but that's where I'm going, right? So whiteness then at that structure continues, even without having to talk about whiteness necessarily. Actually, if you want whiteness to appear, then, okay, it disables you. If you even mention whiteness or blackness, then again, that posits you very close to the vulgar racist. So that's another form of disabling. So liberalism reigns supreme in that sense. So part of this, a last observation before I just start to read parts of this. That part of my insight is obtained by the following. I have the sense, and this is sharing a sense. I have had some conversations and so on, I think I can back it up in some ways, but just sharing you this sense that if apartheid was brought back tomorrow, I have a feeling that possibly most whites, or at least a sizable proportion of whites, will be good with it. And that others will not find anything too much strange with it, other than when they go out after 9 p.m. they don't see so many black people out. But the lived reality, the structural reality, won't be fundamentally too different. And I think that if that is true, or something like that, how could you preserve a reality of fascism and apartheid so close to this glorious democracy and liberalism? Is because it's always, liberalism is a thin layer covering deep structures. So that you take the covering, it's not a radical. So what it means is that then that made me think what it is that when you are a liberal, how do you what does it mean to combat liberalism, fascism with liberalism? So I was wondering those that are opposed to apartheid, let's say in the apartheid era, for the sake of bringing about a liberal order, that they were still, in reality, still committed with the order of apartheid, not necessarily with the ideology of apartheid, and with some of the most explicit and vulgar laws, but ultimately with the order that it creates. So what they didn't want was necessarily the obviousness and vulgarity of it, particularly when apartheid and segregation, fascism was then turning into old news and old fashion in the global order. So the idea is that you don't want black people having to be controlled daily or at night, having these cards and so on. The best order is really where they themselves accept the rules and the logic of the system, even if they go out at night. And where they themselves let themselves be guided by those who know, who are prepared to leave, or they become advocates. They are so ingrained in the system that they can occupy that position, epistemic position of whiteness. So the notion is that we can give them the gift of free mobility with the understanding, in the social arena, with the understanding that they will use such freedom to play by the liberal rules. And the first rule to be learned is the notion that it will be illiberal to give some kind of advantages to blacks or whites in the new order as a group. Right? So everything is about individualism, preparing the individuals to do something. As a group, you have to disable any kind of measure that sort of targets groups in a substantial way. And also, if we want to have a healed society, we have to avoid going through the traumatic past, which of course is sort of the role of truth and reconciliation commissions in a way that then you leave the past. You can begin in that moment and forget the past. We need to focus on the rights of individuals in the present. That's the motto of change. From the present, then play by liberal rules to address socio-historical and economic disparities with measures that allow individuals to succeed. Now, in this process and in this credo, sort of liberal counter to the reality of apartheid, I think that there are two major ideas or modalities or technologies of power. I don't know exactly how to call it or being. One is that the liberal subject is the individual. Is the individual is like a monad, right? It's the citizen as an individual. And the other thing is that this individual is sort of here in the present, endowed with some rights. So the temporality of the liberal order is the temporality of the present, of the right now. Of the right now with a very extreme, slow change using those liberal tools. But it's a change that in a way, it's a change, it's a very slow change that at the end of the day, the institutions of liberalism try to make sure that the radical change will never happen. So you live in liberalism, you're always living as if you're waiting for Godot all the time. You're waiting for Godot to come. But the coming of Godot, the coming of that new order is always displaced. And you have to follow those rules. And those rules actually keep displacing the moment of actual, fundamental, let's say, equality. And so ways in which you see the academy, the university, acculturating, socializing subjects into this notion of individuality and into this notion of temporality. And for example, and particularly, and I think there is a strong relationship between liberalism and the liberal arts and sciences. Right? They are strongly connected. So the liberal arts and sciences, ultimately, they try to cultivate a liberal subject. Open, diverse, tolerant. Tolerant is the key. And never committed radically to that change, right? That you always put any kind of change or issue of action into a discussion. Right? Let's discuss it. So, for example, and for the liberal mindsets, and in the academy you see this all the time. When people say, for example, about when you raise the question of decolonization of the university, And people say, well, but what happens is, apartheid ended 20 years ago. But you see, it takes about 20 years to train one person to then see if that person will be competent to occupy a position in the academy. Right? So it takes 20 years, and this is one by one. This is one by one. And then about 20 years for them to do this. Obviously, the presumption here is that the system, what was in place, is already the measure, right? It's already the criteria to determine the value and the measure. So the question is about integration, right? But still, there is a sense of the monopoly of rationality and reason in that context. So, and then it comes, well, you see, the problem is not that we don't want to change, the problem is that in order for those individuals to come here after 20 years, they have to go through the primary school. So if they don't have good primary school, they will not get here. Then secondary school, then their families, then their culture, then, and you see, you list almost an infinite kind of ingredients. Why of obstacles for those subjects not to be able to go through them, obstacle through obstacle, through 20 years to then get to the university. So you see at the end, it's not our fault. It's that the university cannot just suddenly assume the responsibility of, by alone, responding, and in that process, risking lowering its height standards. Now, and you see, if the standards were really great, I think that you would be developing extreme forms of critical thinking around this very logic. But it's a very, very easy and I think lazy form of thinking. Right? So it is already, this kind of liberal responses in the academy tell you that whatever the criteria of excellence are, they're not really that great to begin with. And they have never been, I mean, even from the racist sciences of the 19th century, if you see what passes science then as the high science, they were based sometimes, the typologies of human beings on the basis of aesthetic criteria, all kind of prejudices, right? So it's tended to be like that, even while it poses itself as the supreme form of authority when it comes to knowledge. So the idea is that, it would be like a miracle then to have 1, 2, 3 blacks that actually make it and actually are good. But then once you get there, the issue is that you need to behave. Because remember, the presumption is that the system is already fine. Now you got there. The question is that once you make it, if you will behave. If you follow the rules of the established disciplines, of the established theories, of the established frameworks. And you need to resist, to do your best if you are that black person who makes it, above everything, to avoid appearing as emotional. Because emotional is the opposite of reason. And the moment when you break the liberal order and bring an intervention that cannot be translated through liberal values, you will most definitely be labeled, minimally, the emotional. Because you're traumatized. Right? And at the end, there is no reason to be so emotional because we are in a democracy now. And it's a delicate democracy, and we should all come out to support that democracy. This is not the time to be feeling, to be allowing ourselves to be led by our feelings and our knee-jerk reactions. So that is that there are multiple forms of disciplining, liberal disciplining, in every step of the process. So the system is made so that the least amount of blacks will actually make it, and those who make it then absorb and then play by those rules. That is the ideal liberal being. With that, it will take maybe 200 to 300 years for maybe 20% for there being maybe 20% of more longer blacks of being in the academy and so on. And 90% of them, if they follow those rules, will be reproducing the same problems that all the whites that were there before. So that's liberalism. So the idea is that for the foreseeable future, whatever reality is really separated from apartheid by a thin, very thin layer of reality. Very thin layer. So then the temporality and the subjectivity, right? The temporality is in the present. It disconnects the past. If you bring up the past, again, you're being overreactive. You're stuck in the past. Right? We need from the present to look to the future through these liberal rules, and you in the present and in the future you need to see yourself as purely as an individual. So already when you're talking us or we, there you're breaking already liberal rules. Now the third dimension, in addition to subjectivity, the control of subjectivity, whatever the conceptualization of subjectivity in the liberal order, and the conceptualization of temporality. The third element is spatiality. The space also is control. So the present, this present, is the one of the existing spatial configuration in terms of urban space, urban division in the country, rural versus urban, and so on. And you are given the time to change it. You are given the freedom. And the notion is like, what more do you want? Now you have the freedom to change the space if you think that there is a problem with it. But again, it's a change that you are supposed to do as an individual following the liberal rules, which at the end, ultimately, it will disable you, it will cut out the tools that you need to make that change happen. And if you want a faster change, typically how that is conceived in the liberal order is that then now you're not simply being an individual, you're an entitled individual. You feel entitled and you want the state to give you these things above what it gives other individuals. And that's also illiberal and cannot happen. So that position is very much restricted. And again, to the extent that you ask for it, you are being not only emotional, you're stuck in the past and so on. So black individuals now can have the possibility to address their own condition of a spatial segregation. Now you're free to move with this formal freedom, then now you can do it. But you see, the other trap is the following, that it is faster for capitalism to find new ways to keep the segregation through the apparent invisible hand of the market than to individual blacks to make it to the point where their interventions can seek to change the spatiality of the system. So your tools are out. You no longer have tools. If you claim them, you're already a problem. And in the meantime, the system has found other ways to cement, to give a foundation to the same inequalities. So you no longer need the law telling you, you need to stay here, you cannot cross here. You already have the market and price of housing and land and so on, doing that for it. So you effectively, you don't need the laws anymore, making that explicit. And so I think that the university is also critical in producing a citizen subject that is well cultivated, where, in this kind of work, even in this kind of specialty. So when you come to the university, you're also come to this particular space, and this space is supposed to remain the same. And that means from the architecture and the symbols and so on, to the existing divisions by fields and disciplines. That's knowledge, but I think it also filters into space. Because when you come to the university, it's like, well, biology is there, mathematics is there, the humanities are there. There is a way in which you live. Actually, you go to a classroom to study, but once you enter the campus, it's like you are living literally in the space formed by the disciplines. So there is a way, very real way, that you are being disciplined by being in the space. Because the coordinates, the north and south, right, the basic coordinates of knowledge are given to you already there by virtue of being on the campus. What is the space? What is this discipline? What is this center? And so on. So that's why I am entering it at this level through spatiality, even though it has its own unique area as epistemology, of course, right? And pedagogy and language, like you were pointed out. So when you come as a citizen, as a subject, as you're supposed to go to an individual, to that space, the disciplining of the disciplines starts right there in your adequation to the spatiality of that liberal order. And remember, there is the best of all possible knowledge is there. So the idea is that you finally get exposed to it and you absorb it. So now the access to it, again, is very people who will access to it, both because you may not get the training necessary to go to it because, again, the deficient primary system, secondary system, and so on and so forth. But also because of the fees, you may not be able to pay for it. Right? Or you would be, even if you go, then you may have to drop because, you know, the loans and payment and this. So access is by itself. We cannot take access for granted to these units, the holy of the holies with the university when it comes to knowledge. So access, we cannot take it for granted in this liberal order. And if there is one lesson that a student is supposed to learn, is that education is an individual investment. So the norm should be that you pay for it and you seek to enter a world which only works by having individuals paying for everything. So having to pay in the university is the way of socializing you into entering a society where you pay for everything as an individual. Right? And that's where, even if you are very poor and then the state is, let's say the state is paying for you, but it's like someone is paying. You are very rich, you are paying. So the idea is that the logic is the one of individual investment, individual payment. Now, with the idea is that once you have this ethos, let's say, this habitus, the result is that social change is supposed to occur when there are enough individuals who have enough capital to do something. But by then the only rules they will know are those of individual payment and profit, meaning that they would then be free to enjoy their newly found goods without a sense of social responsibility or guilt, because it's what they work for, and now they are attaining what it's their right to enjoy what they gain. So in summary, the liberal university helps to cultivate the subjectivity, the sense of temporality, and the sense of temporality of segregation via its control of space. Education, and the university particularly, are meant to be vehicles of social mobility in these societies. They're for controlling who has access and how. Yes, so they are vehicles of social mobility. So access is controlled to them, and also what you can get from when you're inside, when you are inside, what you can get from it, which is supposed to be in line with the liberal order. So you need to be able to pay and learn to pay for everything and see that as an individual investment. And one pays for entry to a space defined by a certain architecture, symbols of power, and so on and so forth, and certain epistemic order. So these three elements play a vital role in producing the post-apartheid citizen subject who is adapted to the spatial and temporal dynamics of South African democracy, one where we understand ourselves as individuals, we suspend the past and start from a neutral present, because we are, after all, reconciled. And blacks try to gradually, very slowly and responsibly start to enter the institutions that will allow them to obtain social mobility, not without first being socialized more fully into the sense of individual subjectivity and ahistorical temporality that will make it next to impossible for most other blacks to ever enter those spaces that will allow them to gain any social mobility at all. So there is a sort of maybe a dialectical dynamic in that context that continues perpetuating sort of the same order. So let me summarize some points, and of course I am highlighting these elements because I think it's important. Then they will help to understand at least what the student movements are about and what they are challenging. So my points are that A, in conditions of colonialism, slavery, segregation, and or apartheid, liberalism represents an effective mechanism to continue the same divisions of resources and goods with a less vulgar ideology and social order. That is why if you were fighting apartheid with liberalism as a goal, back when apartheid was established, was working explicitly, it doesn't really matter how much of a hero you were in those moments in the past. If you were doing it with the idea of establishing the liberal order. If you were fighting against apartheid with liberalism in mind, you are ill-prepared today to even understand the basis for some contemporary struggles in South Africa, particularly in the universities. We should not be surprised when the anti-apartheid hero of yesterday takes the role of condescending parent or the police in relation to the current student movements. That is known, is actually a very consistent place to be. And so also when the universities, some universities, for example, have some pride that when apartheid was in vogue, established, that they remain the bastions of liberalism in that context. So I'm trying to understand, when again the same university is not even understanding the demand for decolonization of the students, they are also being very consistent liberalism in that university. Liberalism that was always too close to the actual social organization of apartheid to begin with. So being a liberal in the university or anywhere in that context, really, it was not about radical change of the system, and therefore still is not. So the university is a key institution in that it is meant to be the most crucial vehicle of social mobility in the state and society. The university promises two things: social mobility, even more than technical schools, and presumably a better chance to innovate and be critical, right? Those are the things that usually the technical schools won't give you so much. So that's part of the value of the university. Social mobility, innovation, capacity, training for innovation, and some kind of critique. But by instilling the habitus of individual investment, and by keeping the same architecture and the same disciplines and epistemic organization that existed in the colonial and apartheid era intact, not only the university creates a citizen subject socialized into the norms of capitalist social mobility within a highly segregated social reality, but also makes innovation functional to the system and reduces the reach of critique. So it says that it's giving you social mobilization and also ability to innovate and critique, but all of those things are skewed by its own liberal framework and in service of capitalism and the ultimate apartheid structure that continues. C, the ways in which whiteness as a project, structure, and form of consciousness continues today is not by legal edicts or laws that separate blacks and whites, but by advancing particular conceptions of subjectivity, temporality, and spatiality, like the ones that I have identified. So you can be embedded fully in whiteness, and in your mind you're not even talking about whites or blacks or anything like that. It's about a certain commitment with a logic, with a certain conception of subjectivity, temporality, and spatiality. And you can be black as a person, black person, but insofar as you are adopting this mode of temporality, subjectivity, and spatiality, you are, in a way, white. So whiteness is this sphere. And the university is instrumental in not only preserving but also advancing whiteness in this way. So, and as I said, this analysis helps us to understand. I take it that I have on the 10:30 maybe? Do I have? So this analysis helps us to understand the significance of the student revolts in South African universities. So, first off, why universities? Why universities? And well, if universities are key sites for the reproduction and legitimization of the liberal and to some extent neoliberal order. So they are key. In the apparatus of the state and liberalism and neoliberalism, the universities play a critical role. Right? They're also key for whiteness, the reproduction of whiteness, understood again as this ethos of individuality, this presentist notion of temporality with extremely slow change, if at all, will happen, and linear temporality, and this very conservative form of spatiality, that the order must be conserved. Right? The order must be conserved. And if not the architectural, the last bastion is the disciplines themselves. They must be conserved. So the universities are the sort of the bastion of liberalism, the place of training, of reproducing it, and reproducing this logic. The students, these are some of the things students are targeting, not only in the university, but in South African society and politics in general. They are targeting education as an individual investment. And that is something that, for example, fees must fall. I think that one of the targets is precisely that. It's not a question about paying 3 cents or 5 cents or $10 or whatever. It's against the model of conceiving education as a sort of privatization, as something that you buy by individual, something that you know, because when you do that, you install that order, then again, you're socializing subjects to adopt the logic of individuality and investment and return. So that's what they are opposing. And of course, the state wanting to preserve it, rationalize it in so many ways, is the interest in continuing. The idea with the success of South African society will only depend on the extent to which actually these ideas are maintained. Right? So that's why you need to, even if it is symbolic, they must pay those fees, right? There should be this dynamic of paying. We need to pay, even if it's 3 cents, because it's much more than the money that you get from them. It's about instilling that ethos in that body that is going through the university. So challenging the question of the fees is much more than a simple economic issue, as important as that is in itself. It's also, the movements are also targeting the temporality of change. They are already unpersuaded about the liberal notion of the present, right? These notions of that bringing the past is being old-fashioned or whatever, or resentful and so on. And they are, of course, challenging the spatiality of the university. So those must fall when you start getting the statue of Rhodes is part of that challenge, is the space. But clearly, when they are asking for the colonization of the university, it's clear that it's not only about that, it's also about the space of the disciplines, the configuration of the university, right? So that's the other part. So in a way, the student movements are actually targeting the fundamental access of liberal power and of whiteness in the country while doing the struggles. It is not only about little symbol here, a little symbol there, little change here, integration there, some more diversity here, inclusion there. It's a much larger, and I think, political struggle. Teaching us and advancing different forms of conceiving of individuality, subjectivity, of temporality, and of spatiality. Of course, the university response and the liberal state response is to then pathologize or criminalize the movement. So anything that looks out of the norm, that is going to be magnified, and then the movements are going to be, identified with those moments, and at most, what they say will be translated into transformation committees and unit of change management, as I said before. So when they talk about decolonization, is yes, even the decolonization of knowledge, but it's also about the decolonization of the subject of temporality and of spatiality itself. So really, they're talking about an entire new order way beyond the university. Now, and with this, I am afraid I won't be able to go into so much, maybe I can steal from the moderator a few more minutes. It's 23. I have 7 to 10, maybe I'll take a few more. But in a nutshell, so when you look at universities itself, what is the challenge? First, of course, the liberal university cannot understand this for the most part, I think. Right? This is not the ground. So they are criminal, they are excessive, they are putting at risk our democracy, it's everything. Right? It's everything in that life. Now, when you look at the university, at the structure of the university, and this is, again, my preliminary sense about the university in South Africa, where are the challenges, where are they coming from? And from what I've seen is that, if you divide the layers of the university between upper administration, senior administration, one layer, then the layer of, the faculty, which is like, thicker in comparison to thicker layer in comparison to the higher administration. And then you have the student body and the workers, even thicker but below with much less power. So you have more power